Greetings, everyone. This is Richard Solomon broadcasting from the Abrams Communication Center at WCWP 88.1 FM. We have a phenomenal guest today. As a person who has a big Rolodex of people, we sometimes look inside our Rolodexes and say, who will be a real, by the way, it's before Facebook and and Outlook Express. We kind of look inside and we say, who would be really interesting? Now, I happen to love film and movies and all that other stuff, and so does my wife. My wife actually was part of a movie club, and we would actually go on Saturday mornings, and there'd be this a movie, and then we'd see sort of like, was it Robert Altman, one of those people who actually talk about the movie or some of the key actors. I remember seeing a great movie called Standing in the Shadows of Motown, and the director was there and a couple of the key people, and they talk about not only making the movie, but the substance of the movie and what didn't make the movie. And then I have a friend, his name is Blair. He has a son named Sasha, who actually at the age of 13 makes movies. So I just love movies. In fact, I'm a very big fan of drive-in movies. We'll talk about that. But our guest today is Ali Acker, who's a local Long Island person and is an aficionado on many, many different things. She has an FCC license to broadcast. She is a published author of both hardcover and softcover books. She's a filmmaker. She is a historian, and she has all this great stuff. Now, welcome to the show. And
thank you.
And why don't you tell us a little bit about your coming home in a way? This is
yes. I started right here in this very room at WCWP, and I don't even want to tell you the year. I got my start.
I remember that year.
My start in media, thanks to Bill Moser. I was a local high school student at Wheatley, and we were doing They were doing experimental school within the school kinds of things, and they basically said to us, well, if you can find something really interesting to intern in the world, you don't have to come to social studies class. I actually like social studies class, but they also said English class. And I also kind of liked English class, but it sounded like
But this was better.
Exactly. It sounded like an interesting challenge to me, and I don't know what possessed me to take right over here, thinking college radio would take us in, but I came and talked to Bill Moser. Little did I know he had been a high school intern in radio, so he was apt to say absolutely, and I came over here, and by the end of that year, I had my own radio show, and I used to do hours on Joni Mitchell and hours on Simon and Garfunkel and tell you all the dirt behind the songs.
So artist spotlight material.
Right.
Now, I know that we talked about this in pre-production, but I remember watching Joni Mitchell play with the band in The Last Waltz, the movie, which was
an incredible experience.
I saw that in 1978, I guess, at the Ziegfeld Theater.
Wow.
That was obviously before MTV, and it was probably a pioneering movie in its day because
absolutely,
nowadays you see Martin Scorsese's Shine the Light with the Rolling Stones, and I wonder how much of that was sort of originated all those decades before in The Last Waltz.
It's hard to know. I saw Joni on stage in London in 1978, I guess it was, or 77. And she was very shy in front of an audience. It was very interesting to watch her.
Huh. I've seen James Taylor a number of times, and I still think he's a little shy.
He probably is.
Despite his
New England boy
fame. And I actually met him once at a health spa in Massachusetts. Anyway, you have this tremendous wealth of knowledge about women and in cinema. How did all of that start? I know that you had sort of an interesting start in another media after radio.
Well, thanks to radio. Radio kind of put me through college. And when I got out of college, I got a job with NBC.
WNBC.
No, not WNBC. NBC Network in New York, excuse me, as a video editor for Nightly News. And then I was there about 8 months and got an amazing job as a producer for the Today Show. And I was there for a number of years, and I was doing, it's an amazing training ground for learning how to make little 5-minute movies in a job like that. And I was doing a 5-part series in LA on great women in Hollywood, and ran into a guy named Mark Wanamaker, who is a Hollywood stills aficionado, and just had all these amazing stills of people behind the scenes on the set. And he had a little unmanned, unnamed cardboard box lying around with these women who were clearly in positions of power and influence, and they were all just anonymous. And I said, who were these women, to Mark? And that was a question that would haunt me.
That's right. We need sound effects.
for another 6 years. And the outcome of that was not only a book called Real Women Pioneers of the Cinema, which came out in 1990.
Which we have right here.
Yes.
This is. Let me tell you. This is. I have to say it because this is a very impressive book. First of all, it's a real substantial book because this is rated.
It's a book.
You know, it's a real substantial book, and it looks like one of those really, really well thought out reference type books that has both pictures and stories, timelines. Just an incredible thing.
Filmographies.
Yeah. So. This became like a textbook in all kinds of
places.
That
became like a textbook around the world in film departments. And I also did a series of 10 one-hour documentaries from that book called Filmmakers on Film, in which I interviewed great women, directors on directing, producers on producing, editors on editing, the producer-director relationship, all kinds of different aspects of the film industry. Which I now sell on my website, realwomen.com, REEL, realwomen.com. And also Jodie Foster, I was lucky enough to get Jodie Foster to host one of the very first interactive CD-ROMs in history, and we called it Real Women, The Untold Story, which is also available in a flash format now.
Wow.
Cool.
It's funny.
Cool.
I know this is a little bit off topic, but I tend to do that. The actual celluloid films from the early days, are they like disintegrating? I mean, are people trying to rescue them and digitize them?
Yeah, I mean, there's always been a big rescue out there, but as you know, it's very, very expensive. So it's an interesting question. Who decides what gets to be archived, and who decides what an important film is? Is an important film a big violent movie, War and Peace kind of thing? Or is it a very small relationship film like This Wonderful Life? I mean, what's a great film, and who decides what a great film is?
The heirs who can digitize it and make money.
That's exactly right.
That's exactly
answer. Right. And that's, that's what I learned about history, is that history is a story told by the victors.
That's right.
Right? Because the women who began in the film industry in 1896 the reason that it took like almost 80 years for the history of women in film to be written down by me is because they were virtually forgotten by the film historians in the 30s and 40s who said, well, there don't seem to be any women in here, and they essentially didn't write them down. When there were more women working in positions of power before 1920 than at any other time in history, including today.
Wow.
Now, when the history of film started to be written down in the 30s and 40s, women had been shown the exit door by the unions in the 20s when film became very big business. So, and, you would have periodicals like the Moving Picture World and the Motion Picture and all these periodicals of the early days of cinema, but they weren't indexed. So if you had a story about Mabel Normand opens her own studio, or Lois Weber is the highest paid director of the silent days, all these stories went completely unindexed and uncatalogued. So when film historians in the 30s and 40s looked through these magazines, there was no index. So How did they know about the women? They had been forgotten.
That's terrible. So wait, was there actually a film industry between like 1896 and say 1906? Or how did that evolve? Did it evolve sort of as just something that people did? Was it really an industry? And it must have been amazing for people who were, I guess, I don't want to say it like this, but primitive in a way, to see something on movies or in film that existed before, because they had no, the other day I was with my nieces and my friend's daughter, and they're all playing with his iPhone. And these are people like 3-ish years old, and they're playing with an iPhone.
Three-ish.
They were like three almost 4, whatever. It's some, because there was different kids. And here they are, playing with the iPhone as natural as can be, matter of fact. But here you are, maybe you are 35 years old. You kind of knew about the Civil War. And now all of a sudden you're watching something that must have been just a little bit of a freak out thing.
Well, you remember seeing those movies of people watching early movies when the train was coming right toward them, and the people were running out of the theater. Yeah, I mean, that was a really freaky thing. But on the other side of it, it's like I was really lucky to interview someone like Lillian Gish before she died. This ages me too, but I have to say she was like 98 when I talked to her, and she, being known as what they call the second actress on the screen, said to me, there was no place you'd rather be on a Sunday than the studio. You didn't care if you were getting paid or not. So it was just this big, active, exciting new medium, like the internet, except with community, with live bodies.
With real people.
with live bodies. So it was like the energy must have been just so exciting, and it must have been contagious, so that people, they just wanted to be there and part of it. So yes, there were studios, and there was a developing sense of kinds of jobs, but there were lots and lots of hyphenates because there were no unions until the mid-20s.
But why? So why did
so there were producer directors and actor engineers and all kinds of different Renaissance people.
Why did the unions push the women out as opposed to embrace them? Because they're already an entrenched, knowledgeable group of people.
Because I guess the concept in capitalism is that the idea of women and money don't really go together. It's like, right? I mean, it's now that it's a business, shouldn't you be home doing something? I mean, I think that, culturally it's very enmeshed in us, or, and still, I mean, I still have these ideas that even though there are lots and lots of women in corporate positions, my big question for women in film as well in very influential positions today is, are they women? You know what I mean?
Okay.
Or are they people being taught how men do what they do very well? Are these women doing what the guys do and learning what the guys do and how the guys do it, and are they doing it as well or better? But
here's a question, though. Women's rights were almost minimal in 1896, and yet they seem to have broken through that. Why would it be eroded if they had kind of broken through? Let's face it, in 1896. When did the women get the right to vote?
Not until 1920.
Right. So this is 24 years before the right to vote,
right.
And they had power.
Well, we're not talking about a lot of financial power, I don't think. We're talking, you have to remember that to tell somebody you were even a male actor in like 1910 wasn't a very reputable thing to do. And there was
like telling people now I'm a lawyer.
Something like that, yes. You said it, I didn't.
I can.
But there was something about kind of being in that industry, and there was a big snob academy between the theater actors even and to be a film actor. If you told somebody you were a film actor, you might as well crawl back down into the cellar.
Oh, but if you're on Broadway, you were like,
exactly.
Okay.
So the movies weren't really looked upon as the kind of industry you wanted to aspire to. Not really until the mid-20s, late 20s, when it became a big money-making industry.
Okay, when did movies go from being, I guess, say in 1896, an experiment or a novelty, to something that was, I guess, mainstream? But mainstream is probably not the right word for it, because I can't imagine that in the 1920s there was a plethora of movie houses all over the place, especially in...
But there were.
Really?
But
even
they were
rural
growing.
Areas and things like that?
It began as a very independent industry. There were lots of independent studios. That's why, people like Alice Guy Blaché would open her own studio. And, film started in Fort Lee, New Jersey, until they realized that the weather was better somewhere else, go west. And so really the film industry started here very early and then migrated west. And in those days, it was like, I lost my train of thought.
Wait, well, why Hollywood? Why Hollywood?
Why
Another-
Hollywood?
another
Because it
way-
was warmer. Really, that's why. That's
Yeah.
why people came here. Is
Okay.
because it was warmer here.
Well, this show is one of those shows that's going to be like an evergreen. But if you remember, we had a brutal winter not that long ago, where we did a lot of shoveling between January and February.
Oh, I know what I was going to say. Sorry. But it started as a very independent industry, just lots of very independent people. And suddenly, the studios were beginning to understand that audiences would pay money to see these movies, and they began incorporating as big studio shops.
I got it. So okay, you're listening to 88.1 FM with Richard Solomon. The show is Taking Care of Business, being broadcast out of the Abrams Communication Center. See, in 1896, there was no communication center. And we didn't use Adobe and all this other stuff to record. You can catch us at tcbradio.com. For now, you can catch some of the podcasts at tcbradio.mypodcast.com, but that will be changing to a more robust and enriching environment. You can catch us on iTunes at TCB Radio under the podcast, which are all free. And you can listen to us at WCWP.org. And we're with radio alumnus, radio producer, filmmaker, and documentarian and historian and author, Ali Acker. So from right here in Long Island. So
Right here. This is my
right.
home.
That's right. Oh my God, she's got that southern drawl for our southern listeners. And we're talking about just the whole subject today is women in media, because her website is realreelwomen.com. But just the whole, people love movies. Oh, how could you not love movies? In fact, yesterday I was at the IMAX movie with my nieces and my family and everybody else, and we were watching this new release about sharks, and it was a Cousteau movie by I guess Jacques Cousteau's either son or grandson, and I guess Jean-Michel, and we're so affected by movies now. In fact, when you think about it, in your high school or you're dating, what was the thing you do? Oh, let's go to a movie. You have a little dinner and a movie, and so how did movies become embraced into the social everyday life? Like, when did that happen?
Well, I think that was again about in the mid to late 20s when the studio system came into being.
So when was the silent era? When were the silent movies?
Well, the silents were really from about 1896 to 1926. When was The Jazz Singer? That was the very first
movie with
sound
sound
movie. Oh. Although I'm even taking that back. That's kind of let's go Control Delete. Control Z, isn't that it? But that's in 1906.
Right.
Alice Guy Blaché, who was the first narrative film director in history, beating Méliès by about 6 months, she made a film called The Cabbage Patch Fairy, in which she made children in a cabbage patch. When Alice Guy Blaché came to America, to Fort Lee, New Jersey, and she opened her own studio called the Solex Company. She, for about 5 years, did about 150, what they called, putting this in quotes, sound films in 1906 on something called the Crone film, which was a wax cylinder recording device.
I remember seeing those at the Edison Studios in New Jersey.
Yes. So actually, I'm going to even take back the famed film historian line that Al Jolson's did the first sound film in 1926. He didn't. It was Alice Guy Blaché actually did the first sound films in 1906.
Now, what was the hard technique, getting the soundtrack to match the mouth
syncing,
movement?
Right,
so it would look like a Godzilla movie?
Exactly, right. And I have to tell you that, women were great innovators of a lot of accepted technologies that we take for granted now, like Dorothy Arzner, who was the only woman directing in Hollywood of the 30s and the 40s, came up with the idea of the boom microphone.
Wow.
And before that time, what was happening is that actors would stay stagnant in about a 2x4 space.
And shout?
Yes, and the microphones would be stagnant as trees. And suddenly Dorothy said, why don't we put a microphone on a fishpole and follow the actors around? And that is, in fact, how the boom microphone came to be.
No kidding. What other great inventions were by women in film like that?
Let me see. Natalie Kalmus was the mother of Technicolor. And also, Dorothy Arzner did another very interesting thing. She did the boom mic, and she did the movie crane. That was another one of her inventions.
Wow. One of my clients is a crane rental company.
Right.
And I remember seeing a movie. I can't remember the movie it was, but I knew the crane operator. And when the movie opened, I was like, oh my God, that's so-and-so. And that, it was really funny.
So Cecil B. DeMille owes a lot to Dorothy Arzner.
Wow.
Because he was sitting up there a lot.
Do women bring a different style to the movies, or a different point of view, or a different theme?
Well, that's a question I get asked a lot when I go to universities and I give lectures on, great women in cinema. It's like, do women see differently? And I think the answer to that is as different as human beings alive. It's really, one of the comments I get a lot is, but there are, look at all the women who are directing now. Look at all the women who are greenlighting movies now. And I'm always saying to them, that's the wrong question. The right question is, what are these women thinking about? What is their consciousness? Being a gender doesn't necessarily make you aware of how you're using this very powerful medium. You can be.
Well, no, but I guess the thing is this.
You can be like Katharine Heigl and saying, see, all blondes are stupid. Yay. You can do that, or you can be aware that this is affecting a young woman somewhere.
No, that's true, but I guess I'm really talking about more from the historian point of view. Did you notice anything like when you were talking about the boom mic, for example? Did you notice that the women brought maybe a creative, technological edge that was missing because everybody was so, I guess, stiffly scientific and mathematical?
I don't think you can make that kind of assumption with anybody. I mean, it really is as different as human beings alive. I mean, there are very creative, aware, conscious filmmakers, and then there are just people who just like to make movies. It doesn't matter what let it be slice and dice. That's okay with me. The idea of making a movie is so difficult that I have to say I honor anybody who actually gets through the process.
Well, you make movies, so let's talk about, for just a second, the movie-making process. And first of all, is it, with all the technology today, is it easier or harder? Because I remember something that the Beatles said, and we talked about this in an interview with Steve Rosenfield, talking about My Father's Place. Remember the Beatles in an interview said they would stretch so hard to find new sounds. And then as time went on in the music industry, there was too much sound. It was just too easy. Is that, is it harder because you could do things in your home, as opposed to in the old days where there was like field work and labs and all that other stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm one of those believers in, like, if you have to suffer, it'll probably be better.
Suffer for the art.
Really, if you have to struggle for it. Because, the fact that really anybody who knows how to work a computer, really can make a movie today. That can happen. But it's like D.D. Allen, the great D.D. Allen, who was probably the most industry-changing editor of all time. She edited Bonnie and Clyde in 1967, which virtually changed the whole field of film editing because of she ignored what they call match cuts. In other words, if you're doing a wide shot, the person has to be sitting in the same way, facing the same direction, looking in the same way as in the close-up. Well, Robert Wise, when they were cutting Bonnie and Clyde, said, forget the match. I want it faster, faster, faster. And by doing that, she changed the whole field of editing. And she said to me, you know what? Anybody can use, in those days it was a butt splicer to cut film. She said anybody can use a butt splicer. They don't hire you for how you know how to cut the blood splicer. They hire you for what you know. And she pointed to her noggin. They hire you for what's up here.
Did they use Scotch tape to glue it together?
Of course they did. Or something like it, basic. So it all has to do with, it's not about what the tools are. It's always about what the script is. It's always about what a great movie will always be because the script is great. It doesn't matter what tools you're using. I just read about a fantastic new film that came out of YouTube. I don't know if you heard about this. But last summer, this guy solicited movies from all over the world from people asking them, what do you do in a day? In one day. Upload a little movie of what you do in one day. And he took these millions of films and he edited them all together. And he called it, I forgot the name of it.
A Day in the Life?
Yeah, A Day in the Life. And it's gone completely global. Now, here's an idea that was very simple. A very simple idea. But the fact that it was such a great idea is what makes it a great movie.
Well, it's also interesting. He really cut his production costs down to just editing.
Now, is that brilliant? Is that brilliant or what?
It's sort of like, it's sort of like asking everybody for their favorite recipes, and then you make the cookbook out of everybody else's recipes.
Exactly.
They did all the work.
That's exactly it.
Wow. So, who do you admire in your pioneers of the cinema, 1896 to the present? Who did you admire, and did that get changed when you met them?
Well, I have to say, when the first part of the question, who do you admire? A lot of those people are gone now, right? I did admire Dede Allen fantastically. She passed away this past year. And do you know this woman never won an Oscar?
Oh, wow.
She is the most influential editor of all times, and she never won an Oscar.
But is that because the Academy Awards are essentially political as opposed to...
Yes. I mean, it's New York versus L.A. There was always a big war there, and she was a New Yorker through and through. But there are contemporary filmmakers that I really admire. Nora Ephron is one of them. And, I had a funny story with her because in '86, when I was doing that 5-part series on women in Hollywood, she, at that time, I think she just was nominated for an Oscar for writing Heartburn and Silkwood. So she hadn't done a lot yet. But I called her on the phone, and by God, she picked up the phone because I was working for the Today Show. And I actually had a conversation with her, and I said, would you be part of this 5-part series? And she says, I don't have enough experience yet. I'm not experienced yet to be... kind of called a groundbreaker in this industry.
Wow.
And I said to her, that's going to change. And, I could see the pioneer in Nora Ephron.
As a marketing consultant, I would have said, you're going on the Today Show. In fact, I'm getting Rick Frischman to yell at you.
But I have to say that I actually just wrote her and asked her if she would write the foreword for this new book I have a new book coming out called Real Women, The First 100 Years. It's going to be a 2-volume book. The first volume will be 1896, Great Women in Film, 1896 to 1960, and volume 2, 1962 to 2010. The first 100 years. And so, keep your fingers crossed. But she's one of those people who hates women in film panels. She basically says, I'm not a woman filmmaker, expletive. I am a filmmaker. I'm not a woman filmmaker. And of course she is. Of course she is. But she's a writer first. And she is the mother of all great scripts. And whenever people say, how do I get into the movie business? How do I do that? What's the best way? I always say, if you have a green pen, write your way into the movies.
Do you feel that script writing is eroding? And is it because is it eroding because of the quest for the certain demographic? Or is it that people aren't as smart as they used to be? Or something? But I definitely feel like there was and has been great writing, and I don't see that. Even like when you read certain kinds of newspapers that were known for being well written, they seem to be like a little bit more watered down, a little bit more picture oriented.
I think you said it right there. I'm going to sound like a real snub when I say this, but you know what? People don't read anymore.
Oh, no, they have the attention span of 5 seconds.
Yeah, and people really never did read in Hollywood, but somehow they were smart enough to hire writers who did, and they're not doing that anymore. I mean, and that's, I think, the sad fact of it is that movies today make or break in basically one day, 2 if you're lucky, and over the weekend. And if you don't make it during the weekend, you're yesterday.
Well, what about this whole phenomenon now of where sometimes a movie isn't really that good and it just goes straight to DVD?
Yeah.
Is that a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Is it one thing that the internet did was it allowed a lot of independent musicians to break out and do all kinds of things. But on the other hand, there was no filtering mechanism because now everybody's a podcaster, everybody's a musician, everybody writes something, and there's no...
And it's the same thing with film. I think it's the same thing with film today.
Right. So how in a very crowded marketplace of ideas, which is good because you want a lot, how do people who are busy kind of find the good stuff that may be a little hidden away, but it's still worth catching?
If you can catch that in a bottle and sell it for 50 cents, Rich, you will make a fortune.
I keep looking for that $1 million idea, so maybe this is it. Okay, speaking of which, you are listening to WCWP 88.1 FM on your dial. This is Richard Solomon with my very, very special guest, Ali Acker. We are talking about women in media. This is the Abrams Communication Center. You can be catching us at WCWP.org, TCBRadio.com. If you'd like to send an email to us, the email address for the show is tcbradio.wcwp@yahoo.com. And we get all kinds of really, really cool and wacky emails from all over the globe. We've had people in Ireland and Anguilla at the Dolphin Discovery Center.
Really?
Oh, yeah, all kinds of. We did a show about Memphis, and somebody from Ireland wanted to know when the show was being rebroadcast. And, of course, we have plenty of local people who catch the show, and we've got some great feedback. We got a phenomenal feedback on the two shows for My Father's Place. That was just huge, because I also happen to love rock and roll. In fact, our theme song is by Tim Rockmore from the band Brother Mustard, and they were on the show at one point.
Which you won't hear today.
You can't hear today, but you have to go to the archives. Yes, one of my favorite stories, as I was telling Ali at pre-production time, was when Rick and I were co-hosting the show together, and lightning hit the tower, and all we had was sort of just the ability to record. That was it. There was no music channels. There was no phone out. There was no nothing, and our guest was waiting to be interviewed by telephone. We had to call them on cell phones, saying. I think it was like our friend Dave Sterling. It was like, Dave, not happening.
But you were having fun.
We had fun, and I think we actually asked, as a fundraiser, if you had like a pickup truck with an antenna or modulators or a soundboard to bring it over, because we were accepting donations of equipment.
And this is the magic of the digital age.
Exactly. But was radio and television and movies better when it was all analog?
Oh, that's such a hard question. I mean, that's a hard question. I think if you're asking me personally, it's a very personal question.
But this is
better is, a frame of mind, isn't it? It's like, I think when you had to work for those industries, get a job in those industries, you really had to have some training, some background. The way the economy is now, it's like, if you're cheaper, we'll hire you.
That's right.
And it's kind of scary. So I would say, from that perspective, better.
Well, that kind of reminds me of an internet joke that floated around where they decided to outsource the office of the president to some guy in India who will do it for a lot cheaper.
And you think that won't come? You heard about Watson this week, who beat Jeopardy.
That's right.
And they were playing a clip from Star Trek, and it said, "Is this really Dr. Spock's voice?" And the computer said, 98% low probability.
I remember Star Trek. It's funny. Star Trek really promoted a lot of the technological ideas. Look at Get Smart with the shoe phone.
It did. It was fantastic.
I look at television in those days sort of like Get Smart, and one of my favorite shows of all time was Mr. Ed. And I remember watching Mr. Ed with my grandmother. And my grandmother was probably born around 1896 at the time, and I remember she used to say to me all the time, "How did they get the horse to talk?"
Isn't that cute?
So but anyway, so let's get back to some of the great women of media. Who had, in your opinion, in the last, say, in the last 50 years, because you talk about 1960, so more of the people who are listening, including me, I was of that age. Who are those women who were really sort of interesting people, and what did they bring that was new and different and exciting and sort of a different point of view to cinema in the last 50 years? Or do you just like because they were goofy or cool or funny or cutting edge?
Well, there was people like J. Preston Allen, who was a great writer, and she wrote The Primer of Miss Jean Brodie, and she once told me a story about being an early writer for Alfred Hitchcock, and she told me that he taught her a lot about economy. And she says, she wrote this long scene of this woman going down to the boat plank and walking up the ramp, and she was getting her indoors and out of doors. And Hitchcock said, for economy, why don't we just show her on the dock and then cut to a scene where we see the vase of flowers going from left to right, as though it's buoying on a boat. And you get the idea immediately that we're on a boat. So she taught me a lot about economy and writing from that story. I think I started to write a book called Whatever Happened to Real Women, the second generation. And the second generation of real women, I really felt, were the women from about 1970 to 1990, when the women's movement was pretty hot. And we thought, well, women are going to be in greenlighting positions now in a matter of 20 years, which would be today, sitting here. And wouldn't you know that there are less women directing major productions on Hollywood today than there were 20 years ago.
That's shocking in many ways.
But I felt that those women, between like the second generation of real women, I call them, were a very special band of women because they did have all this optimism that it was only a matter of time that everything was going to be equal in the motion picture industry. And they had all of these incredible ideas of greenlighting movies, and there was innovation, especially among foreign women, I have to say. Margarethe von Trotta is one of my great heroes. And she wrote movies about real, R-E-A-L, women's lives in a way that was completely true.
Refreshing?
Well, they were refreshing because they were real lives, and it was completely unconstrained by studio money. And women in foreign countries can do that because if they make a flop, it's a flop for the whole state. If they make money, it's money for everybody. It's kind of a sane way to look at the arts. But in our culture, if a woman loses money on a major motion picture, she probably won't get a chance again. If a guy like Judd Apatow, makes a flop, they just look at him as, oh, well, he's got potential. Let him do it again. It's a very
Is it true? Even in today's very rough economics?
Yeah, I think it is.
Because it seems
I mean, look at Judd Apatow.
No, I think more like, kind of think of the never-ending sequels where they take something that sort of has moderate success and they will beat it to death.
Ben Stiller is a great example of that, right?
They will beat a formula to death because it worked one time, and they'll squeeze and squeeze. They will squeeze the orange until the dust comes out of it.
Yes, look at the new Ben Stiller film. What is it with Streisand and all these amazing people?
Meet the Fockers?
Yeah, I mean
that's an FCC compliant word, by the way.
And what a piece of junk that is, and it's made so much money, and it's such a piece of junk.
Well, see that's the thing. It's like, do you feel that people are much more reluctant to go to the movies now because they kind of know when they look out there that, like, do you ever get? It's like a Friday night.
Who are you describing as people?
The consumers. It's like sometimes you ever feel like you're with some friends or family or whatever, and somebody says, "Hey, let's go to a movie." And then you look at the listings, whether you go to your iPhone or a newspaper, or you're driving by the Long Beach Cinema, and you look at the choices and you go, And I've noticed that lately, in the last 5 years for sure.
Except, if it's people like you and me, and we look at the King's Speech, we'd probably go.
Right, but how many of the King's speeches are really out on any particular day? But I remember, like, the summer of 2010. I love the drive-in movies, and I would actually go onto websites to see what the Hyde Park Drive-In, the Poughkeepsie Drive-In, the Fair Oaks Drive-In would actually. For my birthday present, I got a little drive-in movie set. I got a little picnic table, a little personalized,
I love it.
1 foot by 10-inch little table, to put my beverage and my popcorn, and I had I always wear my little mosquito hat. I got a little mosquito light, so you light that to keep the mosquitoes away. And I got a little radio. So that was for my birthday. My wife gave me because she knows I love them, and she loves the movies too. And I remember struggling in the summer of 2010. We'd go on the web. There's like nothing, but there's like nothing playing. And I remember never feeling like that there was nothing playing, especially when you go to these, like in the middle of the winter, you go to these 20-plex movies where there's 20 things going on from 11 in the morning to 2 in the morning.
Right.
And you figure there's got to be something that you can watch.
Even on television, there's 800 channels and nothing to watch.
Well, that was the subject of a Springsteen song, which was 57 channels and nothing on. And I'll never forget that. I said, he actually captured, I got a satellite in the sky, with it goes into the great beyond, and there's 57 channels and nothing on.
That's it.
And
but on the flip side, there's always TCM.
That's true.
So we're happy about that.
But if you've seen it, it's like how many times are you going to see the same, movies over and over?
50.
See, now, that was interesting is my wife loves.
If it's Greer Garson, I'll watch her 150,000 times.
My wife could certainly watch some movies like she loves The Shawshank Redemption. So if she just saw it, like, say, a month ago and it was on again, she'd be like, she'd watch it again. Whereas I'd be like,
I would do that with Moonstruck.
They're like, yeah, but I saw. I just saw that. So it's funny how people. Now, how much of the movie going money making is invested in people really seeing the same stuff over and over again? The reason why I ask is sort of like this. The music industry made a lot of money by selling the same music in different formats. They had vinyl, they had cassettes. I mean, they had the CD, they have the download now. So they made, Dark Side of the Moon was like a giant album for Pink Floyd. They sold it on 8-track, and then they sold it on cassette. They sold it on vinyl. They sold it on, remastered CD, and then they sold it again as on iTunes. So they took the same product and just, you bought it over a lifetime all these different times. I remember when Titanic came out, that the reason why the sales, the ticket sales was so high is that there was a certain demographic of people who went to the movie theater more than once and watched it several times. Like there was enough people who watched it 2 or 3 times, thus tripling the sales. So how much of that is a factor?
There's the whole DVD thing, and are they winning or losing the war? Because of free downloads and pirating and all of that stuff. And I think it's a losing battle, essentially, because I think that you can't trump technology, and people are going to win it every time. It's an interesting question. It's going to be a very big factor on our expensive movies going to continue to be made. How are they going to protect the privacy and keep making money over and over again? Unless it's a kind of movie where you can do marketing and dolls and the kind of stuff they did for Star Wars. It's an interesting question. What is production going to look like in 20 years?
Right now, as we're recording this, there's 2 kind of tragic events taking place. Borders is closing. They filed for bankruptcy.
Terrible thing.
And that is going to be a problem, because it creates a loss of, I remember when Tower Records went out and Sam Goody. So this
Although
is like
Barnes & Noble seems to be saying that they're making money.
Okay, but that's, but I guess if you're the last holdout,
it's scary.
It's one
it
thing.
Is.
But and all of the blockbusters in Queens are closing down. In fact, I know because I spoke to the clerk at the store. He said, at the end of February of 2011, they're going to start winding everything down. I think in March of 11, they're going to pretty much close most of the Queens stores. What does that say to you, as someone in the film industry, that a retail outlet, both Blockbuster and Borders are being lost?
I think it's a very sad thing. That's a very sad tale, and I think that it's basically the loss of community. I think you're going to see the loss of movie theaters in the same way. I think Blockbuster will go, in total, in the next couple of years. They basically went down, I think, because they didn't embrace technology the way that Netflix did. And Netflix is already seeing into their future.
All right, quick station ID. This is WCWP 88.1 FM with Richard Solomon. And we are talking with Ali Acker about women in cinema. And we were talking about the death of Blockbuster and Borders and the whole shakeup in the film industry. Do you see a little bit about the film industry as to what happened in the music industry? Is that what you see now?
Which is,
sort of the death of Tower Records and the CD format, moving more to the internet. Is that what you're now seeing?
Well, sure. Everything's moving to the internet. Everything's going to be streaming in a matter of years. That's scary for the movie theater, certainly.
Right. But is that good for the industry, or is it?
Well, good for the industry. What is the industry? Is it a money?
Filmmakers. I'm talking about.
It's not great for filmmakers. Well, I mean, you can argue that it's going to open up a bigger market for independent filmmakers all over the world, that anybody can see anything they want at any given moment. But that whole collective experience of what is a movie, financially in our culture, is it a good move? Perhaps, but we don't even have studio systems anymore. We're back to an independent industry where everybody is, basically making a dollar any way they can. And most of the big film, quote, industries or businesses are run by business people now. They're not really filmmakers. So is it good for the almighty dollar? I guess we'll have to see. But that's not really what film...
How is the American film industry doing in comparison to the international film industry, which is apparently starting to grow? You hear about Bollywood, you hear about, all these other things. Are we in trouble? Because I know that in the gross national product, filmmaking was actually considered an export.
Which is true, and people still around the world love American movies, and I think there will always be that clamor toward American movies, toward Woody Allen. Where else could you get a Woody Allen but America?
It's
right?
true. But let's go back to what you said. It was very interesting about community. I remember so many times when you go to a movie theater and you'd watch something that would say it was really funny, and everybody would burst into laughing. And then sometimes if the movie was really popular, they would be showing it at different times, and you'd be waiting outside to go into, I guess, Theater 1 while Theater 2 was, maybe wrapping it up, and you hear like, all these people like cracking up, and you're like, wow, that's going to be hilarious. Right. That whole experience. And then maybe when everybody went out for coffee afterwards, it's like, the whole deconstructing, what'd you think? Oh, was that funny? Or did you really think that the butler was going to be the guy to, hide the jewels,
Yeah, that's why Cinema Arts, for instance, in Huntington is still such a popular venue, because they kind of figured out what community is to people and what it means to people. And I think the loss of that will be the loss of a culture in general. It's going to be certainly the loss of a movie culture. But I think that, for instance, Cinema Arts in Huntington is doing that because they've got a cafe there. And you can, kind of have a membership and get 2-for-1 movies on that membership. And, all of that stuff is what people are nostalgic for. And, even the young people, I find, who love movies are nostalgic for a time they never knew.
Well, I think that's why I love the drive-in movie so much, because, I remember going to the drive-in movies. It was family time. You go with your parents. I remember there were cartoons. There were double features. It was a whole night out. It was fun. You got to have your snack, and you got
whatever. To neck with the girl in the car.
I didn't have a car for a long time, so and bicycles, just didn't cut it. But I remember when like Westbury, Long Island had a drive-in movie theater.
I remember that too.
And now it's a multiplex, and I know that you want to see movies all year long, and there's a lot of long, cold winter or rainy or brutal nights and weather that are not conducive to the movies, but having lost the drive-in movie. Look, what's more American than cars, food, and cinema all put together?
Right.
So this is one of those, another fast hour of radio. So I want to kind of get to a couple of things that we didn't get a chance to talk about.
Segue, a radio term. Segue.
So I understand you have some poetry books also.
I do.
So you have all this depth. You have history, women, in the filmmaking industry, the last 100 years coming up, your DVD series, which is on Real Women Media.
And also, Jodie Foster had hosted a CD-ROM called Real Women, The Untold Story, which is available on Flash right now.
Was she really cool?
She was an amazing person. I have to say, I'll tell just a little two-bit story, that she walked in looking like a 17-year-old anorexic. And when she went into makeup 20 minutes later, she came out a star. And I kid you not. Whatever that aura is that it quality that stars have. Jodie Foster had it, and she was a really nice person besides.
See, that's why I do radio, because no one could ever accuse me of being an anorexic. Because if you look at me, you know that's possible. Okay, so I'm holding in my hands here a book from Red Hen Press.
Brand new.
Brand new. And it's called Some Help from the Dead. And what's interesting is the H in help has a ladder going way up into the great beyond. So tell me about this book. These are obviously poems, and
this is my third collection of poems, and these are poems basically from the last 10 years. And, you know, when you get to this stage in our lives, we tend to have a lot of loss. And even though some
sadly,
help,
yes. Yeah.
Sadly, and even though Some Help from the Dead sounds a little onerous, it's actually a very optimistic book, where, you know, I find that people who have passed beyond us have, a wisdom that's completely without words. And some of that wisdom I try to hone, and they sent me some soul messages, which came out in the book.
Wow. Any moments you want to share that, because do you want to...
Do you want me to read a couple of...
Yeah, you want to either reflect upon or kind of relate to?
Well, I'm gonna give you an example of a lighter moment in the book.
Okay.
This is a book called The Laundromat. And I hope I can do this without my reading glasses, which is somewhere else. The Laundromat. Every time you go down a road, it changes into something else. You think you're on your way to do the laundry, and then a face will smile at you. She's pretty. She asks for a walk. Pretty soon, you're in Mozambique or China. The peasants are rising up, and all you wanted was some clean underwear. You feel resentful, victimized even. You never meant to be on this road, but then your therapist reminds you you chose it. Somewhere in the middle, the light grows dim. A forest grows up around you and blocks the sun. The pretty face is gone, and you're stuck with all of these peasants who want you to feed them. Their mouths open and caw at you like baby birds. You fly from river to river looking for food. You want to nest, but you're too busy. In the middle of your journey, you hear a rumble. You look down. Somewhere, a washing machine is calling. It looks vaguely familiar, you think, like a dream you once had. But you fly right on, mistaking the laundromat for someone else's life.
Wow. So have you ever thought of taking some of the poems, making them into lyrics, and then setting them to music in a collaborative kind of music situation?
That's your job.
Okay.
No, I haven't, but
Because you basically, the reason why I say that is you've done the entire spectrum of artistry. You've got sort of, filmmaking, radio, television, poetry. The only thing that I didn't see like next to your name in the long list of great talents was songwriter. And since you already have the thing, you just need like somebody to wrap some music around it. And
well, I'll tell you, I'm a big musical comedy lover. Not even just musical comedy, but just a Broadway musicals. I love them. So if I found the right lyricist, sure, I'd jump in.
So, were there any? Let's just jump back for a second. Were there any women in cinema who started in theater, or did anybody make the jump back from theater to the cinema to the theater, anything like that?
Oh, sure. Well, Lillian Gish certainly did it. She started on the stage, and she went back to the movies, and she went back and forth. And I mentioned Margarethe von Trotta before, who was the German filmmaker. She began as a German film star for Volker Schlondorf, who later became her husband, and for Fassbinder. And then later she said, wait a minute, I want to jump over, and she said in her German accent, I want to jump over the camera and work on that side of it. And a lot of women, and women today are certainly, beginning as actresses, and it's an old tradition, and moving as to directing from there, for sure.
If you were to finance a movie today, is it harder to finance a movie today, or is it easier to finance a movie today?
I think it's more difficult. I think
because of the distribution.
I think distribution for sure. I mean, you can't guarantee an audience anymore. You can't really put together a proposal for a film package that can say, this is this demographic, and it's all so global and so changing at every moment. I would think it would be a much more difficult thing to do. And certainly, women have made great strides, especially in documentaries. And I don't think that is any accident, because documentaries are so much easier to gather the money together for. You can pick up a camera and go out and shoot and not even have any money to begin a film. And that's the long, beautiful history of documentaries. But still, as I said, you can also advertise on YouTube and have everybody else do the hard work and you do the editing. So you can do that for really cheap. It's all in the script.
Well, what's kind of interesting is my favorite kind of movie, I guess, first and foremost, is the documentary, because I like to learn things. And when I tend to listen to things, on the radio, podcast, or whatever, I tend to listen to nonfiction or just things to, one of the things I used to do a lot was if I had like long trips to courts, like in Riverhead, where you maybe do 165 miles in a day, is I'd go to the library right next door to my office, and I would take out an audiobook. And then if you had a few trips out to Riverhead or something like that, you could knock off about 6 or 7 CDs worth of audiobooks in a week.
Think of all the knitters in America, the women who knit, even the men who knit. What a great audiobook audience that is.
Well, it's interesting. Way back when, in the cigar making field, all these people would make cigars, and then it was somebody's job to read like a newspaper or read stories to them. This is I'm talking about way before like radio or whatever. So in a way, that was sort of the precursor of all these things today.
Well, when you're telling that story, I was thinking about the story of that the field of editing began as a women's field, actually, in France, because they said women were always good at little details like sewing. So they would stick women in these big sweatshop rooms to hot splice films all day long. And that when editing actually transformed into a real artistic medium, the women had been there all along. And so you see there's a long history now of male auteurs using women editors. Martin Scorsese does that. Woody Allen does that. They all have their women, the great woman behind the man scenario.
There you go.
Interesting.
So what do you see in terms of the future of filmmaking, film distribution in America and the world?
Well, I can tell you.
What does that crystal ball show you?
Well, I can tell you what I hope, at least for women filmmakers, is that here's my secret wish to you out there, if you're a young aspiring female filmmaker, is that films are so powerful and so important in all of our lives, and they change our lives, and that if a male filmmaker or a woman filmmaker, if you can be conscious about the kinds of role models you are putting on the screen, if you can just stop a minute when you're writing that script and say, what message am I giving with this character? I think that's the most important thing you can do as a filmmaker. And thinking, how can this film make a better world and a more peaceful world and a more just world? And I think, not that every film has to be pedantic, but I think if you have to be conscious as a filmmaker, I feel very strongly that you take a lot of responsibility in your hands when you make a movie, because movies do change our lives, all of them.
Well, it's interesting because I covered the Long Island Music Hall of Fame Awards, and I spoke to one of the original rap people, and he said, yeah, we were a little, we kind of, and he goes, now that I have children, I realized that, we have to kind of tone some things down.
Interesting.
And that was kind of an interesting thing. And of course, we're out of time. So this is Richard Solomon. Thank you for listening. Our guest was Ali Acker, who's got all kinds of things that you need to look at. Reelwomen.com, REEL, women.com. Check out her website. She has a DVD series. She has books. She has books on poetry. She's really a tremendous talent. Thank you for listening. We'll see you in a week. It's been a pleasure. TCBRadio.com, and we'll see you soon. Thank you.
This is the future of radio. Coming to you from the School of Visual and Performing Arts at the CW Post campus of Long Island University, you're listening to WCWP, Brookville, New York.